Sometimes the most broken souls find each other in the darkest moments, and together they discover a light that no one else could see. This is the story of a disabled teenager who saw hope where others saw danger, and a feared dog who would prove that love has the power to transform even the most damaged hearts. What happened next would leave an entire community in tears and change how they viewed both disability and second chances forever. The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Riverside Animal Shelter as 16-year-old Marcus Chen wheeled his chair through the automatic doors. The familiar smell of disinfectant mixed with dog food hit him immediately, but today felt different. Today, he wasn't just visiting to volunteer his usual Saturday morning shift. Today, his parents had finally agreed to let him adopt a companion of his own. Marcus had been coming to the shelter for 8 months now, ever since his physical therapist suggested he might benefit from working with animals. The suggestion came after a particularly difficult period following his accident. The car crash that had left him paralyzed from the waist down had also taken away his dreams of playing varsity basketball and attending college on an athletic scholarship. At 15, watching his entire future crumble had been almost unbearable, but something magical happened when he started volunteering at the shelter. The animals didn't see his wheelchair. They didn't offer him pitying looks or speak to him in the overly cheerful voice that most adults used around him now. The dogs just wanted attention, the cats demanded to be petted on their terms, and the rabbits were content to sit quietly while he cleaned their cages. For the first time since his accident, Marcus felt useful again. Sarah Martinez, the shelter director, greeted him with her usual warm smile. She was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and hands that always seemed to have dog hair on them, no matter how often she washed them. She had become something of a mentor to Marcus over the months, teaching him about animal behavior and letting him take on more responsibilities as his confidence grew. "Ready to find your perfect match?" she asked, falling into step beside his wheelchair as they headed toward the kennels. Marcus nodded, though his stomach churned with nervous excitement. He had saved every penny from his part-time job helping his neighbor with bookkeeping to pay for the adoption fees, food, and supplies. His parents had been hesitant at first, worried about the additional responsibility, but Dr. Patterson, his therapist, had convinced them that caring for a pet might be exactly what Marcus needed to regain his sense of purpose. The shelter housed about 30 dogs on any given day, ranging from puppies who had been surrendered by overwhelmed owners to senior dogs whose families could no longer care for them. Marcus had gotten to know most of them during his volunteer shifts. There was Bella, a golden retriever mix who loved to play fetch but was too energetic for apartment living. There was Chester, an elderly beagle who spent most of his time sleeping but perked up whenever someone mentioned treats. And there was Luna, a beautiful husky whose previous owners had underestimated how much exercise she needed. But as they walked past the familiar faces, Marcus found his attention drawn to the far end of the kennel area, where a single dog sat alone in the last cage. The kennel was larger than the others and positioned slightly away from the main walkway. Marcus had noticed it before but had never seen it occupied. "Who's that?" he asked, pointing toward the isolated kennel. Sarah's expression grew serious. "That's Rex. He came to us 3 days ago from another shelter upstate. He's challenging." Speak. As they approached, Marcus could see why Rex had been placed away from the other animals. He was a large dog, probably part German Shepherd and part Rottweiler, with a thick black coat and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to assess every movement around him. He sat perfectly still, watching their approach with an intensity that might have been intimidating to someone who didn't spend time around animals. But Marcus had learned to read dog body language during his months of volunteering, and he saw something in Rex's posture that others might miss. Dog wasn't aggressive. He was afraid. "What's his story?" Marcus asked, moving his wheelchair closer to the kennel. Sarah sighed. Rex belonged to an elderly man named Frank Patterson who lived alone. Frank had some kind of episode, probably a stroke, and wasn't found for several days. When the paramedics arrived, Rex was guarding the body and wouldn't let anyone approach. He wasn't being vicious, but he was protecting his owner. The authorities had to tranquilize him to remove Frank's body and get Rex out of the house. Marcus felt his chest tighten. He understood loss in a way that most teenagers didn't. The months of physical therapy, the loss of his athletic dreams, the change in how people treated him had taught him about grief and adaptation. But Rex had experienced something even more traumatic, losing his beloved owner and then being labeled as dangerous for trying to protect him. The shelter upstate tried to work with him for 6 months, Sarah continued, but he's been returned twice by potential adopters. The first family said he was too protective and wouldn't let their friends enter the house. The second family returned him after he refused to eat for a week. They said he just sat by their front door like he was waiting for someone who was never coming. Rex hadn't moved during their conversation. He continued to sit in the same position, watching them with those intelligent eyes. Marcus noticed that his food and water bowls were barely touched, and there were no toys in the kennel. The dog existed in a state of patient waiting, as if he had given up on the possibility of finding happiness again, but wasn't quite ready to stop hoping entirely. "Has anyone else shown interest in him since he arrived?" Marcus asked. "A few people have asked about him," Sarah replied carefully. "But when they hear his history, they usually decide on a different dog. Most families want a pet, not a project." "And Rex," she paused, choosing her words carefully. "Rex needs someone who understands what it means to feel lost and need time to heal." Marcus positioned his wheelchair directly in front of the kennel. Rex's ears perked up slightly, and for the first time his rigid posture relaxed just a fraction. Something passed between the boy and the dog in that moment, a recognition that neither of them could put into words, but both understood perfectly. "Can I go in with him?" Marcus asked. Sarah looked uncertain. "Marcus, I know you're experienced with the animals here, but Rex is different. We don't know how he'll react to new people in his space. The liability alone." "Please," Marcus said quietly. "I won't touch him or try to force any interaction. I just want to sit with him for a few minutes." Something in Marcus's tone must have convinced her, because Sarah nodded slowly. "Okay, but I'm staying right here, and if I see any sign of stress or aggression from Rex, you're coming out immediately." She unlocked the kennel door, and Marcus wheeled himself inside. Rex watched every movement but remained sitting in the same position. The kennel was large enough for Marcus's wheelchair with room to spare, and he positioned himself about 4 feet away from the dog, close enough to speak softly, but far enough to avoid making Rex feel trapped or pressured. "Hey boy," Marcus said in the same calm tone he used with all the shelter animals. "I heard you had a rough time lately. I know something about that." Rex's ears moved forward slightly, and his head tilted just a few degrees. He was listening. Marcus settled back in his wheelchair and began to speak, not really to Rex, but to himself, the way he sometimes did when he was alone in his room late at night. "I lost something important too. Not someone like you did, but something that felt like everything at the time. I was going to play basketball in college, maybe even professionally. Had scouts looking at me and everything. Then one night, driving home from practice, a drunk driver ran a red light. Rex's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. He was still sitting upright, but some of the rigid tension had left his shoulders. Woke up in the hospital and found out I'd never walk again, never play basketball again. For a while, I thought my life was over. Felt like everyone was looking at me differently, treating me like I was broken." Marcus's voice was steady, but Sarah could hear the emotion underneath. "I guess what I'm saying is, I understand what it feels like when your whole world changes and you don't know how to fit into the new one." 20 minutes passed in comfortable silence. Marcus didn't try to move closer to Rex, and Rex didn't move away. They simply existed in the same space, two creatures who had both learned that life could change in an instant, and that sometimes the hardest part wasn't the physical limitations, but the way others saw you afterward. When Sarah finally indicated that it was time to leave, Rex stood up for the first time since they had arrived. He took 2 steps toward Marcus's wheelchair, close enough that Marcus could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, then sat down again in the exact same position as before. "I think he likes you," Sarah said softly, as Marcus wheeled out of the kennel. "I'd like to adopt him," Marcus said without hesitation. Sarah's eyebrows shot up. "Marcus, are you sure? Rex needs a very specific type of home and owner. He's going to require patience, training, and probably some behavioral therapy, and there's no guarantee he'll ever be the kind of companion dog you might be imagining." "I'm sure," Marcus replied firmly. "When can we start the paperwork?" That evening, Marcus sat at the dinner table with his parents, trying to explain his decision. His father, David Chen, was a practical man who worked as an accountant and approached most decisions with spreadsheets and cost-benefit analyses. His mother, Linda, was more emotional but also more protective since the accident. "Sweetheart," his mother said carefully, "we agreed you could adopt a dog, but maybe one of the friendlier ones. What about that golden retriever you're always talking about? Bella?" "Bella's great," Marcus agreed, "but she needs a family with kids and a big backyard. Rex needs something different. He needs someone who understands what it's like to start over." His father leaned forward. "Son, Taking care of a dog with behavioral issues while you're still adjusting to your own challenges might be taking on too much. What if he becomes aggressive? What if he doesn't bond with you? What if the stress of it sets back your own progress? Marcus had expected these concerns. His parents had been walking on eggshells around him since the accident, afraid to let him take risks or face potential disappointment. But this felt different to him. This felt necessary. Dad, I've been volunteering at that shelter for 8 months. I've worked with difficult animals before, and yes, there's a chance this won't work out, but there's also a chance it will be exactly what both Rex and I need. He paused, choosing his next words carefully. I know you guys worry about me, but I can't spend the rest of my life avoiding anything that might be difficult. Rex is difficult, but so am I sometimes. Maybe we can be difficult together and figure out how to be okay. His parents exchanged a look that Marcus had seen many times since his accident. It was the look of people trying to balance their desire to protect their child with their understanding that he needed to make his own choices and potentially his own mistakes. His mother reached across the table and took his hand. If this is really what you want, we'll support you. But we want to meet Rex first. And we want to talk to Sarah about what kind of support and resources are available if things get challenging. 2 days later, the Chen family visited the shelter together. Rex's reaction to meeting Marcus's parents was predictable. He remained in his sitting position at the back of the kennel, watchful but not hostile. He didn't approach when they spoke to him, but he also didn't retreat or show signs of stress. He's beautiful, Linda admitted, though Marcus could see the concern in her eyes. But he seemed so sad. He is sad, Marcus replied, but maybe we can help him remember how to be happy. Sarah spent an hour with the family, going over Rex's history, his needs, and the challenges they might face. She explained that Rex would need time to adjust, that he might not eat properly for the first few days, and that he would likely be anxious and possibly destructive as he tried to understand his new environment. The most important thing, she emphasized, is patience. Rex has been through trauma, and recovery isn't linear. He might have good days and bad days, and progress might be slow. But if anyone can help him heal, I think it might be Marcus. The adoption paperwork took another hour to complete. During that time, Marcus made 3 more visits to Rex's kennel, each time simply sitting with him in comfortable silence. By the 3rd visit, Rex was lying down instead of sitting rigidly upright, and when Marcus spoke, the dog's tail moved just slightly against the floor. As they prepared to leave that day with Rex walking calmly beside Marcus's wheelchair on a leash, Sarah pulled Marcus aside for a final conversation. You know this isn't going to be easy, right? She asked seriously. Rex is going to test your patience and your commitment. There are going to be days when you wonder if you made the right choice. Marcus looked back at Rex, who was sitting patiently by the shelter's front door, waiting for whatever came next with the same stoic acceptance he had shown throughout his stay at the shelter. Maybe, Marcus replied, but I think we're both ready to find out what it means to heal together. As they drove home that afternoon, Rex sat quietly in the back seat of the specially modified van that accommodated Marcus's wheelchair. He didn't look around with curiosity or excitement the way most newly adopted dogs did. Instead, he stared straight ahead, still waiting, still hoping, but not quite ready to believe that this time might be different. Marcus watched him in the rearview mirror and felt something he hadn't experienced since before his accident, the sense that he was exactly where he needed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. Neither he nor Rex knew what the future would bring, but for the first time in months, both of them had reason to believe that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. The first chapter of their story together was just beginning, and while it would be filled with challenges neither of them could imagine, it would also be filled with moments of grace, healing, and the kind of unconditional love that could only exist between 2 souls who had both learned what it meant to survive the unthinkable and keep going anyway. The first night with Rex was nothing like Marcus had imagined. He had prepared a comfortable bed in his room, bought the best quality dog food Sarah had recommended, and even purchased a few toys that were supposed to help with anxiety. But Rex wanted none of it. The large dog spent the entire evening sitting by the front door, just as Sarah had warned he might. When Marcus tried to coax him to his bed, Rex would look at him with those intelligent brown eyes, then return his gaze to the door. He wasn't being disobedient or stubborn. He was simply waiting for Frank, his deceased owner, to come home. Marcus understood waiting. He had spent months after his accident waiting for the doctors to tell him there had been a mistake, that he would walk again, that his life could return to what it had been. The waiting had been almost worse than the acceptance that eventually followed. Around midnight, when Rex still hadn't moved from his post by the door, Marcus wheeled himself to the living room. His parents had gone to bed hours earlier, But Marcus couldn't sleep, knowing Rex was out here alone with his grief. "You know he's not coming back, right?" Marcus said softly, positioning his wheelchair a few feet away from where Rex sat. "Frank, I mean. I know you're waiting for him, but he's gone." Rex's ears twitched, but he didn't turn around. "I waited too," Marcus continued, settling back in his chair. "After my accident, I kept waiting for my legs to start working again. Every morning I'd wake up and try to move my toes, thinking maybe today would be the day the doctors were wrong. Took me 3 months to stop doing that." The house was quiet except for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and the occasional car passing outside. Marcus found the silence peaceful rather than uncomfortable. He had learned during his months of recovery that sometimes the most important conversations happened without words. "Sarah told me Frank was sick for a while before he died," Marcus said. "I bet you took good care of him. I bet you were the best companion he could have asked for. But Frank wouldn't want you to stop living just because he can't be here anymore." For the first time since they had arrived home, Rex turned his head to look at Marcus. The movement was small, but it felt significant. "I'm not going to try to replace Frank," Marcus promised. "Nobody could do that. But maybe we could figure out how to be okay together. You don't have to love me or even like me. You just have to let me take care of you until you remember how to take care of yourself." They sat together in the dark living room for another hour before Marcus finally went to bed. When he wheeled himself out to the kitchen the next morning, he found Rex in exactly the same position by the door. His food bowl was untouched, and there was no sign that he had moved at all during the night. Marcus's mother was already making coffee, moving quietly around the kitchen in her robe and slippers. She looked at Rex with the worried expression that Marcus had learned to recognize on his parents' faces. "He hasn't eaten anything," she whispered, as if speaking too loudly might somehow make the situation worse. "Do you think we should call the vet, or Sarah?" "He needs time," Marcus replied. Though privately he was beginning to worry too. Sarah had warned them that Rex might not eat for the first few days, but seeing the proud, strong dog sitting motionless by the door was more heartbreaking than Marcus had expected. The morning routine was awkward, with Rex present but not participating. Marcus had planned to take him for a walk around the neighborhood, but Rex showed no interest in going outside. When Marcus opened the front door to demonstrate that he could come and go freely, Rex simply watched without moving. "Maybe he doesn't trust that you'll come back," his mother suggested. "Maybe he thinks if he leaves his post by the door, he'll miss Frank when he returns." The insight was probably accurate, and it gave Marcus an idea. Instead of trying to convince Rex to leave the door, Marcus decided to bring the activities to him. He set up his laptop on the coffee table near where Rex was sitting and began working on homework. Every few minutes, he would speak to Rex in the same calm tone he used with the animals at the shelter. "I'm working on my history essay," he would say. "It's about the Great Depression. Pretty interesting how people found ways to survive when everything seemed hopeless." Or, "I'm going to make a sandwich now. You're welcome to some if you want, but no pressure." Rex never responded verbally, of course, but Marcus began to notice subtle changes in his body language. When Marcus spoke directly to him, Rex's ears would perk up slightly. When Marcus moved around the house, Rex would track his movements with his eyes, though he never left his position by the door. The breakthrough came on the third day. Marcus was eating lunch at the kitchen table when he heard a sound that made his heart skip a beat. It was quiet, barely audible, but unmistakable. Rex was whimpering. Marcus wheeled himself to the living room and found Rex in the same position as always, but his stoic composure was finally cracking. The dog's shoulders were shaking slightly, and soft, heartbroken sounds were escaping from his throat. It was the sound of grief finally finding its voice. Without thinking, Marcus moved his wheelchair as close to Rex as he dared and began to speak in the most soothing voice he could manage.
"It's okay, boy.
It's okay to be sad. I know you miss him. I know this is hard." Rex's whimpering grew louder, and for the first time since arriving at the Chen house, he moved. He turned his body toward Marcus and took a hesitant step away from the door, then another. Before Marcus fully realized what was happening, Rex was standing directly in front of his wheelchair, looking up at him with eyes that were no longer stoic, but filled with visible pain. "I see you,"
Marcus whispered, reaching out slowly to let Rex sniff his hand.
"I see how much you're hurting." Rex didn't pull away when Marcus gently touched the top of his head. His fur was soft and warm, and Marcus could feel a slight tremor running through the dog's body. They stayed like that for several minutes, boy and dog sharing a moment of understanding that transcended species and circumstance. When Rex finally returned to his position by the door, something had changed. He was still waiting, still hoping that Frank might somehow return, but the wall he had built around his emotions had developed its first crack. That evening, Marcus noticed that Rex's water bowl was empty. It was the first sign that the dog was beginning to care for his basic needs again. The food bowl remained untouched, but water was a start. Marcus's father came home from work that day with a bag from the pet store and a determined expression on his face. David Chen was not naturally comfortable around animals, but he was the kind of father who would learn to be comfortable if it meant helping his son. "I talked to the veterinarian today," he announced, pulling out a selection of different dog treats. She said sometimes dogs who are grieving respond better to high-value treats than regular food. She gave me these to try. They were small, soft treats that smelled like bacon and were designed to be irresistible to most dogs. Marcus's father had also purchased a puzzle toy that could be filled with treats, thinking it might give Rex something to focus on besides his vigil by the door. "Dad, this is really thoughtful," Marcus said, genuinely touched by his father's effort. Since the accident, his relationship with his parents had become complicated by their protective instincts and his need for independence. But this gesture felt different. It felt like his father was treating him as a capable person making his own choices rather than a patient who needed to be managed. They decided to try the treats after dinner. Marcus filled the puzzle toy with several pieces and placed it near Rex's usual spot. The dog investigated it briefly, sniffing the toy and clearly recognizing that it contained something appealing. But he didn't engage with it immediately. "Progress is progress," Marcus's mother said optimistically. "At least he's interested." That night, Marcus made a decision that worried his parents, but felt right to him. Instead of sleeping in his bed, he positioned his wheelchair in the living room where he could see Rex. He brought a pillow and blanket and prepared to spend the night keeping Rex company during his longest, loneliest hours. "Honey, you need proper sleep," his mother protested. "You have physical therapy tomorrow, and you know how important it is to maintain your routine."
Rex needs to know he's not alone, Marcus replied firmly.
"And, honestly, I could use the company too. We'll be fine." His parents exchanged another one of their looks but didn't argue further. Marcus was learning to assert himself more since the accident, and they were learning to trust his judgment even when it made them nervous. The second night was different from the first. Rex still maintained his position by the door, but he seemed more aware of Marcus's presence. When Marcus spoke quietly to him throughout the evening, Rex would turn his head to listen, and around 2 a.m. something remarkable happened. Marcus had dozed off in his wheelchair, despite his intention to stay awake all night. He woke to the sound of soft crunching coming from across the room. In the dim light filtering through the windows, he could see Rex working on the puzzle toy his father had brought home. The dog was using his nose and paws to maneuver the treats out of the toy's compartments, eating them carefully and quietly, as if he didn't want to wake anyone. Marcus smiled and closed his eyes again, listening to the gentle sounds of Rex, eating his first meal in 3 days. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Rex was beginning to choose life again, one small treat at a time. The next morning brought another small victory. When Marcus wheeled himself to the kitchen for breakfast, he found that Rex had moved. Instead of sitting directly by the front door, he was now positioned where he could see both the door and the living room where Marcus had spent the night. It was a tiny adjustment, but it represented something important. Rex was beginning to expand his world to include something beyond his grief. Marcus's physical therapy session that day was one of his best in months. Dr. Patterson, his therapist, noticed the improvement in his mood and energy level immediately. "You seem different today," she observed as Marcus worked through his exercises with unusual enthusiasm. "More focused, more present. What's changed?" Marcus told her about Rex, about the long nights and small breakthroughs, and the way it felt to be needed by someone else again, Dr. Beery. Patterson listened with the kind of attention that Marcus had learned to appreciate about her. She didn't just hear his words, she understood their significance. "Taking care of someone else can be incredibly healing," she said thoughtfully. "But make sure you're not using Rex's needs as a way to avoid dealing with your own. The best caregivers are those who have done their own work first." It was good advice, and Marcus knew she was right. But as he drove home that afternoon, he couldn't shake the feeling that helping Rex heal was somehow connected to his own healing in ways he didn't fully understand yet. Maybe they were both learning that survival wasn't just about getting through each day. Maybe it was about finding reasons to believe that tomorrow might be worth experiencing. When he arrived home, he found Rex in a new position entirely. The dog was lying on the living room rug, still facing the front door, but no longer sitting at rigid attention. It was a small change, but to Marcus, it felt like a revolution. "Hey, boy," Marcus said softly as he transferred from his car to his wheelchair. "I'm home." For the first time, Rex's tail moved against the floor, in what might have been the beginning of a greeting. It was barely perceptible, but Marcus saw it, and his heart filled with something that felt suspiciously like hope. That evening, the Chen family had their first normal dinner since Rex had arrived. The dog remained in the living room, but he was alert and responsive when any of them moved through the house. Marcus's mother had cooked Rex a small portion of plain chicken, thinking it might be easier on his stomach than the rich treats, and she was delighted when he actually ate it. "I think he's going to be okay," she said to Marcus as they cleaned up the dishes together. "I think you're both going to be okay." Marcus looked into the living room, where Rex was now lying with his head up, watching them work in the kitchen. The dog's eyes were still sad, and Marcus suspected they might always carry some shadow of the grief he had experienced. But there was something new there too. Something that looked like the beginning of trust. "Yeah," Marcus agreed, feeling more certain than he had in months about anything. "I think we are." The fourth night was when everything changed completely. Marcus had positioned himself in the living room again, but this time he had brought his actual mattress and was sleeping on the floor instead of trying to sleep in his wheelchair. Rex had watched the preparations with interest, and as Marcus settled down for the night, the dog made a decision that surprised them both. Instead of maintaining his position by the door, Rex walked over to where Marcus was lying and carefully lowered himself to the floor, just close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He didn't touch Marcus, but he was near enough that they could share the same space in a way that felt intentional and significant. "Good night, Rex," Marcus whispered into the darkness. In response, Rex let out a soft sigh that sounded almost like contentment. For the first time since Frank's death, the dog was no longer waiting alone. And for the first time since his accident, Marcus was no longer healing alone. They were both exactly where they needed to be. Broken pieces learning to fit together in a new configuration that might actually be stronger than what either of them had lost. The real journey was just beginning, but they had taken the first steps together, and that made all the difference in the world. The first week with Rex established a routine that worked for both of them, but the second week brought new challenges that tested Marcus's commitment in ways he hadn't anticipated. Rex had progressed from refusing to eat to accepting small meals, and he no longer spent every moment stationed by the front door. However, he had developed new behaviors that were more complex and troubling. Rex had become Marcus's shadow. When Marcus went to his bedroom, Rex followed and positioned himself by the door. When Marcus worked on homework in the living room, Rex lay nearby, but always facing the exits. When Marcus transferred from his wheelchair to his bed or to the couch, Rex would stand and pace until Marcus was settled again. The dog's anxiety wasn't about being alone anymore. It was about losing another person he was beginning to care about. Doctor Patterson had warned Marcus that recovery from trauma rarely followed a straight line, but experiencing it firsthand was more challenging than understanding it intellectually. Rex's constant vigilance was exhausting for everyone in the household, but especially for Marcus, who felt the weight of being responsible for another being's emotional well-being. The breaking point came on a Tuesday morning when Marcus had to leave for a doctor's appointment. Rex had been fine with short absences like trips to the mailbox or brief errands with his mother, but this was the first time Marcus would be gone for several hours. As Marcus prepared to leave, Rex became increasingly agitated. The dog began pacing between Marcus and the front door, whining softly and showing signs of distress that Marcus hadn't seen since those first few days. When Marcus's mother arrived to drive him to his appointment, Rex planted himself directly in front of Marcus's wheelchair and refused to move. "It's okay, boy," Marcus said gently, trying to wheel around Rex. "I'm coming back. I promise I'm coming back." But Rex wasn't convinced. As Marcus finally made it to the front door, Rex's whining escalated to sharp, desperate barks. The dog's eyes were wide with panic, and he began pawing at Marcus's wheelchair, trying to prevent him from leaving. Marcus's mother looked stricken. "Maybe we should postpone the appointment," she suggested. "He's so upset." "No," Marcus said firmly, though watching Rex's distress was breaking his heart. "He has to learn that I can leave and come back. If we give in every time he's scared, he'll never trust that good things can be permanent." The decision to leave despite Rex's protests was one of the hardest things Marcus had done since bringing the dog home. As they drove away, Marcus could hear Rex's desperate barking even with the car windows closed. The sound followed him all the way to the doctor's office and made it difficult to concentrate during his appointment. Dr. Suffer Williams, Marcus's physician, noticed his distraction immediately. Marcus had been seeing Dr. Paul Williams since his accident, and the older man had become skilled at reading his young patient's moods and concerns. "You seem worried about something today." Dr. Bow, Williams observed as he checked Marcus's reflexes and muscle tone. Everything okay at home? Marcus explained about Rex, about the adoption and the progress they had made, and about the difficulty of this morning's departure. Dr. Williams listened with the same attention he gave to medical symptoms, and Marcus appreciated that he didn't dismiss the situation as just a dog problem. Separation anxiety in traumatized animals is very similar to what we see in humans who have experienced loss, Dr. Bryan, Williams said thoughtfully. The fear of abandonment becomes so overwhelming that it interferes with normal functioning. But you're right that giving into it doesn't help in the long run. I just hate seeing him suffer, Marcus admitted. He's been through so much already. Part of me wonders if I'm the right person to help him. Maybe he needs someone with more experience, or someone who can be with him all the time. Dr. Williams stopped his examination and looked at Marcus seriously. Can I tell you something about recovery that I've learned in 30 years of medicine? The best healing happens between people who understand each other's struggles. You and Rex share something that most humans and dogs don't share. You both know what it feels like to have your world change instantly and completely. That shared understanding is worth more than all the professional training in the world. The appointment continued with discussions about Marcus's physical progress, which continued to be steady if not dramatic. His upper body strength had improved significantly since he started volunteering at the animal shelter, and his overall mood and energy levels were the best they had been since his accident. I think Rex is good for you, Doctor, Williams concluded as they finished up. And I suspect you're good for him too. Don't give up on each other yet. The drive home was filled with Marcus's anxiety about how Rex had handled the separation. His mother tried to reassure him, but they both fell silent as they turned onto their street and could hear barking coming from their house. Rex had been vocal for the entire 3 hours they had been gone. Inside the house, they found that Rex had been more than just vocal. In his distress, he had knocked over a lamp in the living room and had scratched at the front door hard enough to leave marks in the wood. He had also torn up the bed that Marcus's parents had bought for him, leaving pieces of foam and fabric scattered across the floor. But the moment Marcus wheeled through the front door, Rex's destructive energy transformed into overwhelming relief. The big dog rushed to Marcus's wheelchair and pressed his body against Marcus's legs, whining softly and trembling with residual anxiety. I'm here, Marcus said softly, running his hands through Rex's fur. I'm here, and I'm okay, and you're okay. Marcus's mother surveyed the damage with expression that tried to be understanding but clearly showed strain. Honey, maybe we need to think about getting some professional help with this behavior. If he's going to destroy the house every time you leave. Let me try something first, Marcus requested. Give me a week to work with him on this. If it doesn't improve, we'll call a trainer. That evening, Marcus researched separation anxiety in dogs and found several strategies that might help. The key, according to everything he read, was to make departures and returns as calm and low-key as possible, and to practice very short separations before attempting longer ones. Starting the next day, Marcus began what he privately called departure training. He would put on his jacket and pick up his keys, actions that had triggered Rex's anxiety the day before. But instead of leaving, he would sit back down and continue his normal activities. At first, Rex would become alert and anxious the moment Marcus reached for his jacket, but after several repetitions, the dog began to understand that these actions didn't always mean Marcus was leaving. Then Marcus progressed to opening the front door, stepping outside for just a few seconds, and coming back in. Rex was still anxious during these brief separations, but he didn't panic the way he had during the longer absence. The training was exhausting and time-consuming, but Marcus was determined to help Rex learn that departures didn't mean abandonment. Each day, he extended the separation by a few more minutes, always returning before Rex's anxiety escalated to destructive behavior. His friends from school began to notice that Marcus was less available for social activities. Tyler, his best friend since middle school, called one evening to complain that Marcus had turned down 3 invitations to hang out in the past 2 weeks. Dude, I know you love your dog, but you're becoming a hermit, Tyler said with the bluntness that their friendship allowed. You can't spend every minute of your life training him. What about your life? It was a fair question, and one that Marcus had been asking himself. His grades were still good, and he was keeping up with his physical therapy. But his social life had definitely taken a back seat to Rex's needs. The few times he had tried to go out with friends, he had spent the entire time worrying about how Rex was handling his absence. Maybe you're right, Marcus admitted, but I can't give up on him now. He's starting to trust me, and if I abandon that trust, I don't think he'll ever recover. I'm not saying abandon him, Tyler clarified. I'm saying maybe you need to trust that he's stronger than you think he is. Maybe he can handle being alone for a few hours while you have a normal teenage social life. That weekend, Tyler's words echoed in Marcus's mind as he prepared for what he had decided would be Rex's biggest test yet. His friend Jake was having a birthday party, and Marcus had committed to going before he adopted Rex. The party would last about 4 hours. The longest Marcus had attempted to leave Rex alone since that disastrous doctor's appointment. But Rex was different now. 2 weeks of gradual separation training had taught him that Marcus could leave and return reliably. His anxiety during departures had decreased significantly, and he had stopped destructive behaviors entirely. Marcus felt confident that Rex was ready for this challenge, even if he wasn't entirely confident that he was ready for it himself. The preparation was careful and deliberate. Marcus made sure Rex had plenty of water, food, and several puzzle toys filled with treats to keep him occupied. He left a piece of clothing that smelled like him, where Rex could curl up with it if he wanted comfort, and he practiced his departure routine, keeping everything calm and matter-of-fact. "I'm going to Jake's party," Marcus told Rex as he prepared to leave. "I'll be back later tonight." "You're going to be fine." Rex watched the departure preparations with alert attention, but without the panic that had characterized his earlier responses to Marcus leaving. When Marcus actually left, Rex followed his usual routine of positioning himself where he could see the front door, but he didn't bark or pace or scratch at the door. The party was the first normal social event Marcus had attended since his accident, where he wasn't constantly thinking about what he had lost or how different he was from his friends. Instead, he found himself thinking about Rex and feeling proud of the progress they had both made. His friends noticed the change in his mood immediately. "You seem really good tonight," Jake observed as they sat around the fire pit in his backyard. "Like, really good. Better than you've been since the accident," Marcus finished silently. It was true. For the first time in months, he felt like himself again. Not the person he had been before the accident, but a new version of himself that he was beginning to like and respect. When Marcus returned home that evening, he found Rex waiting by the door, but calm and relaxed. The dog's tail wagged when he saw Marcus, and he approached the wheelchair for greeting and petting, but there were no signs of the frantic relief that had characterized their earlier reunions. "You did great," Marcus told Rex, scratching behind his ears in the way the dog had learned to enjoy. "I'm proud of you." As they settled into their evening routine, Marcus realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. Rex was no longer just a grieving dog who needed constant reassurance. He was becoming a confident companion who trusted that his new life had stability and permanence. And Marcus was no longer just a teenager trying to prove he could handle responsibility despite his disability. He was becoming someone who understood that healing wasn't just about fixing what was broken. Sometimes it was about creating something entirely new and possibly better than what had been lost. The next few weeks brought a series of small victories that built Rex's confidence and independence. He began exploring the house more freely instead of always positioning himself near exits. He started playing with toys for the first time since Frank's death, and he even initiated play with Marcus, bringing him a rope toy and engaging in gentle tug-of-war games that Marcus could participate in from his wheelchair. Most significantly, Rex began to show protective instincts toward Marcus that were healthy rather than anxious. When strangers approached them during walks around the neighborhood, Rex would position himself between Marcus and the stranger, but he remained calm and responded to Marcus's commands. He was protecting without being aggressive, being vigilant without being paranoid. Marcus's parents watched these developments with amazement and growing pride. They had been supportive of Marcus's decision to adopt Rex, but they hadn't fully understood the complexity of what he was taking on. Seeing their son navigate the challenges with such maturity and persistence gave them new respect for the young man he was becoming. "You know," his father said one evening, as they watched Marcus and Rex in the backyard, Rex lying calmly nearby while Marcus worked on homework. "I think you were right about this being exactly what you both needed." "It's been hard work," Marcus's mother added, "but watching you two heal each other has been beautiful. I think you've both become stronger than you were before." Marcus looked at Rex, who was now confident enough to lie in the sun rather than maintaining constant surveillance of his surroundings. The dog's coat was shinier, his eyes were brighter, and his body language radiated contentment rather than anxiety. Rex had learned to trust in permanence again, and in doing so, he had taught Marcus something important about his own capacity for resilience and leadership. That night, as they settled into their established bedtime routine, Marcus reflected on how much his life had changed since the day he first met Rex in the shelter. He had adopted a fearful, traumatized dog, but in the process of helping Rex heal, Marcus had discovered parts of himself that he hadn't known existed. He had learned that he was capable of patience, consistency, and the kind of unconditional commitment that transformation required. Rex still slept near Marcus's bed, but now it was by choice rather than anxiety. The dog had his own comfortable bed, but he preferred to be close to the person who had taught him that love could be permanent and that trust could be rebuilt after loss. As Marcus drifted off to sleep, Rex's steady breathing beside him providing a comforting rhythm, he thought about how Dr. Williams had been right. The best healing really did happen between beings who understood each other's struggles. But what the doctor hadn't mentioned was that sometimes healing someone else was the fastest way to heal yourself, and that sometimes the greatest gift you could give was not your strength, but your willingness to be vulnerable enough to grow together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities for growth, but tonight Marcus and Rex were both exactly where they belonged, safe, loved, and confident that the future held possibilities worth looking forward to. They had built something together that was stronger than either of their individual traumas, and that foundation would support them through whatever came next. 3 months after adopting Rex, Marcus felt like they had settled into a comfortable rhythm that worked for both of them. Rex had become the confident, loyal companion that Marcus had hoped for, and Marcus had discovered that caring for Rex had given him a sense of purpose and accomplishment that he hadn't experienced since his accident. But life has a way of testing our progress when we least expect it, and that test came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon, in the form of an emergency that would challenge everything Marcus and Rex had built together. Marcus was in his room, working on a college application essay, when he heard his mother's car pull into the driveway earlier than usual. Her schedule was predictable, and she wasn't supposed to be home for another 2 hours. Rex, who had been napping on his bed near Marcus's desk, immediately became alert. His ears perked and his head tilted in the questioning posture that Marcus had learned to recognize. The front door opened and closed with more force than usual, followed by the sound of his mother's heels clicking rapidly across the hardwood floor. Rex stood up, his body language shifting from relaxed to concerned. Marcus had never seen Rex react to his mother's arrival with anything other than calm acknowledgement, but something about her energy today was setting off the dog's protective instincts. "Marcus!" his mother called from the living room, her voice tight with stress. "Can you come out here, please? I need to talk to you." Marcus transferred to his wheelchair and made his way to the living room, Rex padding alongside him with the focused attention of a dog who sensed that something important was happening. His mother was standing in the center of the room, still wearing her coat, her purse clutched in her hands, and her face pale with worry. "What's wrong?" Marcus asked immediately, his own anxiety spiking in response to his mother's obvious distress. "It's your father," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "He's had a heart attack. He's at the hospital right now, and I need to get there immediately. I came home to get you so we can go together." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. His father had always been the picture of health, working out regularly and never showing any signs of heart problems. The idea that David Chen, who had been so strong and supportive throughout Marcus's recovery, might be in serious medical danger was almost incomprehensible. "Is he okay?" "What happened?" Marcus asked, already moving toward his room to grab his jacket and phone. "I don't know many details," his mother replied, following him down the hallway. "His colleague called me from the office. They said he collapsed during a meeting and the paramedics took him to General Hospital. We need to leave right now." Marcus's mind was racing as he gathered his things, but part of his attention was on Rex, who had positioned himself near the front door and was watching the flurry of activity with intense focus. The dog's posture was alert but not anxious, and Marcus realized that Rex was picking up on the human emotions in the house and responding by going into protective mode. "What about Rex?" Marcus asked as they prepared to leave. "I can't just leave him here indefinitely. What if Dad—" He couldn't finish the sentence. His mother stopped moving for a moment, and Marcus could see her trying to balance her desperate need to get to the hospital with the practical reality of caring for Rex. "I don't know, honey. Maybe we can call Mrs. Patterson next door and ask her to check on him. Or Sarah from the shelter." But even as she suggested alternatives, they both knew that Rex's separation anxiety, while much improved, still made him uncomfortable with strangers. Leaving him with someone he didn't know during an already stressful situation seemed like it could trigger a setback in his progress. "He's coming with us," Marcus decided suddenly. "I'll call the hospital and explain the situation. Rex is technically a support animal, and given Dad's condition, they might make an exception."
His mother looked uncertain.
"Marcus, hospital policies are pretty strict about animals, and Rex isn't certified as a therapy dog." "What if they won't allow it? Then we'll figure something else out," But I'm not leaving him here alone while we don't know how long we'll be gone or what we're dealing with, Marcus replied firmly. Rex has been through enough abandonment. He's part of this family now, and families stick together during emergencies. The drive to the hospital was tense and largely silent. Rex rode in the back seat, his usual calm presence somehow comforting despite the circumstances. Marcus called ahead to the hospital and spoke with a patient advocate who explained that while pets weren't normally allowed in the hospital, they did have provisions for emotional support animals during family emergencies, especially when the animal was well behaved and under control. If the dog can pass a basic temperament assessment with our security team, we might be able to work something out, the advocate explained, but you'll need to keep him leashed at all times, and if he shows any signs of aggression or disruptive behavior, he'll have to leave immediately. Marcus looked back at Rex, who was sitting calmly in the back seat, watching the passing scenery with mild interest. Over the past 3 months, Rex had proven himself to be steady, obedient, and remarkably attuned to human emotions. If any dog could handle the stress and strange environment of a hospital, Marcus believed Rex could. The hospital parking lot was crowded, and finding an accessible parking space close to the entrance took several precious minutes that felt like hours. Marcus's mother was barely holding herself together, and he could see her hand shaking as she helped him transfer from the car to his wheelchair. "Mom, he's going to be okay," Marcus said, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "Dad's strong, and we caught this early. He's going to be fine." She nodded, but Marcus could see tears forming in her eyes. "I just keep thinking about what would have happened if this had occurred at home, or if he had been driving, or..." Her voice broke, and Marcus reached out to take her hand. "But none of those things happened," he said gently. "He was at work, people were around to help, and he got medical attention immediately. That's what matters right now." Rex had been watching this exchange with the focused attention that Marcus had learned to recognize as his working mode. The dog seemed to understand that the humans in his pack were in distress, and his entire demeanor had shifted to one of calm alertness. When they approached the hospital entrance, Rex walked beside Marcus's wheelchair with perfect heel position, his eyes focused forward, and his body language radiating the kind of controlled energy that professional working dogs displayed. The security guard who met them at the entrance was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and an immediate appreciation for Rex's demeanor. "This is a beautiful dog," she said, crouching down to Rex's level. "What's his name?" "Rex," Marcus replied. "He's very well trained and he's been through some trauma recovery himself. We really need him with us today." The guard extended her hand for Rex to sniff, then gently touched his head and neck, checking his reaction to handling by a stranger. Rex submitted to the examination calmly, making brief eye contact with the guard, but remaining focused primarily on Marcus. "He seems very stable," she concluded. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you a temporary visitor badge for Rex, and you can bring him to the family waiting area. But if at any point he becomes disruptive or causes problems, you'll need to make other arrangements. Deal?" "Deal," Marcus agreed immediately. The cardiac unit waiting room was exactly what Marcus had expected: fluorescent lighting, uncomfortable chairs, and an atmosphere of tense anxiety. There were 3 other families waiting for news about their loved ones, and Marcus was acutely aware of being the only person in a wheelchair with a large dog by his side. Rex seemed to sense the gravity of the environment immediately. He positioned himself beside Marcus's wheelchair and lay down with his head resting on his paws, alert but unobtrusive. Several people in the waiting room glanced at him curiously, but his calm presence seemed to have a positive effect on the overall atmosphere of the space. The wait for information about his father's condition felt endless. Marcus's mother sat rigidly in a chair beside him, checking her phone obsessively and asking the nurses for updates every 15 minutes. Marcus found himself running his hands through Rex's fur, the repetitive motion helping to calm his own nerves while providing comfort to the dog.
After what felt like hours, but was probably only 40 minutes, Dr.
Rodriguez, the cardiologist, came out to speak with them. She was a woman in her 50s with gentle eyes and the kind of presence that immediately inspired confidence. "Mrs. Chen?" she asked, approaching their group. "I'm Dr. Rodriguez, and I've been taking care of your husband." Marcus's mother stood up so quickly that she nearly lost her balance. "How is he? Is he going to be okay?" "He's stable, Doctor," Rodriguez said immediately, and Marcus saw his mother's entire body relax with relief. He did have a heart attack, but it was what we call a mild myocardial infarction. We've run several tests, and while there was some damage to the heart muscle, it was minimal. With proper treatment and lifestyle changes, he should make a full recovery. The news was better than Marcus had dared to hope for, but Dr. Rodriguez wasn't finished. He's awake and asking for both of you. Normally we limit visitors in the cardiac unit, but given his stable condition and his anxiety about his family, I think a brief visit would be beneficial for everyone. Marcus's mother immediately started toward the elevator, but Dr. Rodriguez gently touched her arm. I should mention that your husband was quite worried about how this would affect Marcus given his own medical history. He's been asking repeatedly about whether Marcus is okay and how he's handling the stress. It was exactly like his father to be lying in a hospital bed after a heart attack and worrying about everyone else's well-being. Marcus felt a surge of love and gratitude for the man who had been so consistently supportive throughout his own recovery. Can Rex come with us? Marcus asked.
My father knows how important he is to me, and honestly, Rex has become very good at providing emotional support during difficult situations.
Dr. Rodriguez looked at Rex, who had remained perfectly calm throughout the entire conversation, then at Marcus, then at his mother's tear-streaked but hopeful face.
That's highly irregular, she said slowly. But given the circumstances and the fact that your dog has been remarkably well behaved, I think we can make an exception. But he stays on leash, and if there are any issues with medical equipment or other patients, he'll need to leave immediately. The elevator ride to the cardiac unit felt surreal. Marcus had spent so much time in hospitals during his own recovery that the smells and sounds were familiar. But being there as a family member of a patient rather than as a patient himself was a completely different experience. Rex seemed to understand the gravity of the situation and remained perfectly still during the elevator ride, his eyes fixed on Marcus as if he was drawing his cues from Marcus's emotional state. David Chen was awake and alert when they entered his room, though Marcus was shocked by how pale and fragile his father looked connected to various monitors and IV lines. The man who had always seemed so strong and capable looked smaller in the hospital bed, but his eyes lit up with relief when he saw Marcus and his mother. "Thank God you're both okay," were his first words, which was so typical of his father that Marcus almost smiled despite the circumstances. "We're fine, Dad," Marcus assured him, wheeling his chair as close to the bed as possible. "The question is how you're feeling." "Like I got hit by a truck," his father admitted. "But Dr. Rodriguez tells me I'm going to be fine. Just need to make some changes to my diet and exercise routine." His eyes moved to Rex, who had positioned himself beside Marcus's wheelchair and was observing the room with calm attention. "I see you brought your partner. Rex has been amazing," Marcus said, reaching down to stroke the dog's head. "I think he knew something was wrong before we even left the house. He's been in full support mode since we got the news." As if to demonstrate Marcus's point, Rex stood up and approached the hospital bed slowly, his movements deliberate and gentle. He sniffed the air near David's hand, then sat down beside the bed and placed his head near David's arm, not touching, but offering his presence. David reached out with the hand that wasn't connected to IV lines and gently touched Rex's head. "Good boy," he said softly. "Thank you for taking care of my family today." The visit was necessarily brief, as David needed to rest and undergo additional tests, but it was long enough for Marcus to see that his father really was going to be okay. More importantly, it was long enough for Marcus to realize that the skills he had developed in caring for Rex had prepared him to handle this family crisis with a maturity and stability that surprised everyone, including himself. As they prepared to leave, David caught Marcus's hand. "I'm proud of you, son," he said quietly. "The way you've handled today, the way you've grown over the past few months with Rex, the man you're becoming. I'm so proud of you." The drive home was much more relaxed than the trip to the hospital had been. David was going to be fine. He would probably come home in 2 days, and the family had weathered their first major crisis since Marcus's accident with grace and unity. Rex seemed to sense the change in mood and had returned to his usual calm but alert demeanor. That evening, as Marcus and his mother sat in the living room processing the events of the day, Rex positioned himself where he could see both of them, his presence providing the kind of steady, reassuring energy that seemed to come naturally to him now. "You know," his mother said thoughtfully, 6 months ago, I was worried that adopting Rex would be too much stress and responsibility for you. But watching you today, seeing how you handled the emergency and how Rex supported all of us, I think Rex might be the best thing that's happened to our family in a long time." Marcus looked at Rex, who was lying contentedly on his bed, but with his head up, still monitoring his humans to make sure everyone was okay. The dog who had arrived at their home traumatized and afraid had become the steady, reliable presence that had helped them navigate their first family crisis. I think, Marcus said slowly, we've all learned something about what it means to be there for each other when it really matters. Rex taught me that healing isn't just about getting over what happened to you, it's about becoming the kind of person who can help others heal too. As they settled into their evening routine, the events of the day felt like they had tested and confirmed everything Marcus and Rex had built together over the past 3 months. They had faced an unexpected crisis, handled it with maturity and teamwork, and emerged stronger and more confident in their bond. But Marcus had no idea that the real test of their relationship was still to come, and that Rex was about to demonstrate just how deep his loyalty and protective instincts had become. The next chapter of their story would reveal that some bonds are so strong they can literally save lives, and that sometimes the greatest gift a rescue animal can give is not just companionship, but the chance to be a hero when it matters most. 2 weeks after David Chen returned home from the hospital, life had settled into a new normal that accommodated his recovery needs, while maintaining the routines that had become so important to Marcus and Rex. David was following a strict cardiac rehabilitation program, which meant regular but gentle exercise, a completely revised diet, and careful monitoring of his stress levels. The family had adapted to these changes with the same determination they had brought to Marcus's recovery after his accident. Rex seemed to understand instinctively that David needed extra care and attention. The dog had begun including David in his protective watch, positioning himself where he could monitor both Marcus and David throughout the day. It was a subtle shift that might have gone unnoticed by someone who didn't know Rex well, but Marcus recognized it as another sign of how deeply the dog had bonded with their family. The morning that would change everything started like any other. Marcus was in his room working on his college applications while Rex dozed nearby, and David was in the kitchen preparing his heart-healthy breakfast before heading to his first day back at work. His doctor had cleared him for light office duty with strict instructions to avoid stress and take frequent breaks. Linda had left early for her own work, kissing both her husband and son goodbye, and reminding David to call if he felt even slightly unwell. The house felt peaceful and routine, the kind of ordinary morning that Marcus had learned to appreciate after months of medical crises and dramatic changes. Rex was the first to sense that something was wrong. Marcus was focused on writing an essay about overcoming challenges when he noticed that Rex had suddenly become alert, his head lifted and his ears perked in the way that indicated he was hearing or sensing something that Marcus couldn't detect. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked quietly, pausing his typing to listen for whatever had caught Rex's attention. For a moment, the house seemed normally quiet. Then Marcus heard it, a soft, muffled sound from the kitchen that might have been a chair being knocked over, followed by a heavier sound that he couldn't immediately identify. Rex was on his feet instantly, his body language shifting from relaxed to intensely focused. The dog moved to Marcus's bedroom door and looked back at Marcus with an expression that Marcus had never seen before. Rex's eyes were bright with urgency, and his entire posture communicated that something was seriously wrong. "Dad?" Marcus called out, transferring quickly from his desk chair to his wheelchair. "Everything okay in there?" There was no response, which immediately set off alarm bells in Marcus's mind. His father was naturally responsive, and would have answered if he was able to. Rex was already moving down the hallway toward the kitchen, his pace quick but controlled, like a working dog responding to an emergency. Marcus followed as quickly as his wheelchair would allow, his heart rate climbing with each second of silence from the kitchen. When he rounded the corner and could see into the kitchen, his worst fears were confirmed. His father was lying on the floor beside the kitchen island, unconscious, his face pale and his breathing shallow. "Dad!" Marcus shouted, wheeling himself across the kitchen as fast as possible while pulling out his phone to call 911. Rex had already reached David and was positioning himself protectively beside the fallen man, not touching him but clearly standing guard. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. "My father has collapsed," Marcus said, surprised by how steady his own voice sounded despite his panic. "He had a heart attack 2 weeks ago, and he's unconscious on the kitchen floor. I need an ambulance immediately." The dispatcher began asking questions about David's condition and breathing while guiding Marcus through basic first aid steps. Marcus checked for a pulse and found it weak but steady, and David's breathing was regular though shallow. The dispatcher assured him that paramedics were en route and would arrive within minutes. But as Marcus knelt beside his wheelchair trying to keep his father comfortable and responsive, Rex began exhibiting behavior that Marcus had never seen before. The dog was pacing in tight circles around David's body, whining softly, his agitation growing by the minute. Then, suddenly, Rex stopped pacing and began barking. Not the panicked, desperate barking Marcus had heard during Rex's early separation anxiety, but a specific, rhythmic barking that seemed purposeful and directed. "I'm sorry," Marcus said to the dispatcher. "My dog is barking, and I can't get him to stop." But even as he spoke, Marcus realized that Rex wasn't just barking randomly. The dog was facing the front of the house and barking in a pattern that almost sounded like he was calling for help. 3 sharp barks, a pause, then 3 more sharp barks. The sound was loud enough to carry beyond the house. And within moments, Marcus heard a voice calling from their front yard. "Hello? Is everything okay in there?" We heard the dog calling for help. It was Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor who lived alone next door. She was a retired nurse who had often checked on Marcus during his early recovery, and she had become fond of Rex during their daily walks around the neighborhood.
Mrs. Fitz went to get...
"Patterson," Marcus called back. "Can you come in? My father has collapsed and I need help." The front door was unlocked, and Mrs. Hopin-Gill below fully appealed. Patterson entered the house with the quick, efficient movements of someone who had dealt with medical emergencies before. She took one look at the situation and immediately knelt beside David to check his vital signs with professional competence. "His pulse is weak but steady, and his color is improving slightly," she assessed quickly. "How long has he been unconscious?" "Maybe 5 minutes," Marcus replied. "I called 911 immediately." "Mrs.?" Patterson nodded approvingly, then looked at Rex with new respect. "Did he bark to get my attention?" "Yes," Marcus said, realizing the significance of what Rex had done. "He started barking toward the front of the house like he was calling for help." "Smart dog," Mrs. Patterson said simply. "He knew you needed assistance and he found a way to get it." The paramedics arrived within minutes, and Mrs. Patterson's presence turned out to be invaluable. She was able to provide them with details about David's recent medical history and current medications, while Marcus dealt with his own emotional response to watching his father being loaded into an ambulance for the second time in 2 weeks. Rex remained calm but vigilant throughout the paramedics' work, staying out of their way but positioning himself where he could monitor everything that was happening to David. When they prepared to take David to the ambulance, Rex approached the stretcher and gently touched his nose to David's hand, in what appeared to be a gesture of goodbye and reassurance. "Is he coming to the hospital with you?" one of the paramedics asked, having noticed Rex's obvious bond with the family and his remarkable behavior throughout the emergency. "If they'll let him," Marcus replied. "He's been incredible today." The ride to the hospital felt different from their previous emergency trip. Marcus was calmer, partly because he had experience with medical crises now, but mostly because Rex's actions had given him confidence that they could handle whatever came next. The dog had proven that he wasn't just a companion or even a support animal. He was a true partner who would take action to protect his family when they needed it most. Dr. Rodriguez met them in the emergency room with the expression that was serious but not panicked. "David's condition appears to be related to his medications rather than another heart attack," she explained quickly. "We think he had an adverse reaction to the new blood pressure medication we prescribed. His heart rhythm is stable, but the medication drop in blood pressure caused him to faint." The relief Marcus felt was overwhelming, but it was immediately followed by gratitude for Rex's quick thinking. "Doctor, if my dog hadn't called for help, I don't know how long my father would have been unconscious on the kitchen floor. I might not have been able to help him by myself." "Doctor." Rodriguez looked at Rex with new interest. "Tell me exactly what happened." Marcus explained Rex's behavior, from his initial alertness to his purposeful barking that brought Mrs. Dr. Patterson to their aid. "Doctor." Rodriguez listened with the attention of someone who understood both animal behavior and medical emergencies. "What Rex did is remarkable," she said finally. "Dogs have an incredible ability to sense medical distress, and some of them will actively seek help when their humans are in danger. But the fact that he knew to call for help from outside the house, rather than just staying with you and your father, shows a level of problem solving that's quite extraordinary." Over the next several hours, as David recovered in the hospital and his medications were adjusted, Marcus found himself thinking about the journey he and Rex had taken together. The dog who had arrived at their home traumatized and afraid had become the hero who potentially saved David's life by ensuring that help arrived quickly during a medical emergency. When David was finally awake and alert enough for visitors, his first words were about Rex. "Did that dog really bark to get help?" he asked weakly. "He did," Marcus confirmed, stroking Rex's head as the dog lay calmly beside the hospital bed. "He knew we needed help, and he found a way to get it." David reached out to touch Rex's head with shaking fingers. "Thank you, boy. Thank you for taking care of my family." Rex's response was to gently rest his head against David's arm, a gesture of affection and reassurance that brought tears to everyone's eyes. The story of Rex's heroic actions spread quickly through the hospital staff, and then through their neighborhood. Mrs. Patterson told everyone who would listen about the dog who had called for help when his human family was in crisis. The local newspaper picked up the story, and soon Marcus was fielding interview requests from reporters who wanted to write about the rescue dog who had become a lifesaver. But the most meaningful recognition came from Sarah at the animal shelter.
When she heard about Rex's actions, she made a special trip to the hospital to see him. "You know," she told Marcus as they sat in the family waiting area with Rex lying contentedly between them. "When Rex first arrived at our shelter, I wasn't sure he would ever trust humans enough to bond with a family again.
The trauma he had experienced was so severe that some of the staff thought he might never recover enough to be adoptable." She paused to scratch behind Rex's ears, and the dog's tail wagged slowly against the floor. "But you saw something in him that the rest of us missed. You saw his potential for healing and growth, and more importantly, you saw his capacity for love and loyalty. What he did today proves that rescue animals don't just need to be saved. Sometimes they're the ones who do the saving." Marcus looked at Rex, who was watching the conversation with the calm, intelligent expression that had become so familiar. The dog's eyes were bright and alert, no longer shadowed by the grief and fear that had characterized his early days with their family. "I think we saved each other," Marcus said quietly. "I needed to learn that I could still take care of someone else and make a difference in their life." Rex needed to learn that love could be permanent, and that new families could be just as strong as the ones we lose. We both needed to discover that healing isn't just about getting over trauma. It's about becoming stronger and more capable because of what you've survived. 3 days later, David came home from the hospital with a new medication regimen and strict instructions to continue his gradual return to normal activities. The family had learned to navigate medical emergencies with grace and teamwork, but they had also learned something more important. They had built something together that was stronger than any individual crisis. Rex seemed to understand that his heroic actions had changed his status in the family from beloved pet to essential family member. He carried himself with a new confidence, the assurance of a dog who knew his value and his place in the world. But he also maintained the gentle, intuitive nature that had made him such an effective emotional support for Marcus during his own difficult times. The local newspaper article about Rex's story was picked up,